Invisible world. The idea of the existence of hidden knowledge, surpassing all the knowledge a man can attain by his own effort, must grow and strengthen in people's minds from the realization of the insolubility of many questions and problems that confront them. Man may deceive himself, may think that his knowledge grows and increases, that he knows and understands more than he knew and understood before. But sometimes, should he be sincere with himself, he would see that in relation to the fundamental problems of existence, he is as helpless as a primitive or a little child. He may have invented many clever machines and instruments with which to complicate his life, however he has not rendered it any more comprehensible. Speaking still more sincerely with himself, man may recognize that all his scientific and philosophical systems or theories are similar to these machines and implements, for they only serve to complicate the problems without actually explaining anything. Among the insoluble problems with which man is surrounded, two occupy a special position: the problem of the invisible world and the problem of death. In all the history of human thought, in all forms without exception which this thought has ever taken, people have always divided the world into the visible and the invisible. They have always understood that the visible world, accessible to their direct observation and study, represents something very small, perhaps even something non-existent, in comparison with the enormous invisible world. Such an assertion, that the division of the world into the visible and the invisible has existed always and everywhere, may appear strange at first, but in reality all existing schemes of the world, from the most primitive to the most subtle and elaborate, divide the world into the visible and the invisible and can never free themselves from this division. This division of the world into the visible and the invisible is the foundation of man's thinking about the world, no matter how he names or defines this division. The fact of such a division becomes evident if we try to enumerate the various systems of thinking of the world. First then, let's divide all the systems of thinking of the world into three categories. 1. Religious systems. 2. Philosophical systems. 3. Scientific systems. All religious systems without exception, from those theologically elaborated down to the smallest details such as Christianity, Buddhism, Judaism and Islam, to the completely degenerated religions of primitive origin, appearing as degenerate to modern knowledge, invariably divide the world into visible and invisible. In Christianity, God, angels, devils, demons, souls of living and dead people, heaven or hell. In paganism, gods personifying forces of nature, thunder, sun, fire, spirits of mountains, woods, lakes, water spirits, house spirits, all this is the invisible world. In philosophy there are the world of events and the world of causes, the world of things and the world of ideas, the world of phenomena and the world of noumena. In Indian philosophy, particularly in certain schools of it, the visible or phenomenal world, that is Maya or illusion, which means a wrong conception of the invisible world, does not exist at all. In science, the invisible world is the world of small quantities and, strange though it seems, also the world of large quantities. The visibility of the world is determined by scale. The invisible world is on the one hand the world of microorganisms, cells, the microscopic and the ultramicroscopic. Still further it is the world of molecules, atoms, electrons, photons, neutrons, vibrations, and on the other hand, the world of invisible stars, other solar systems, unknown universes. The microscope expands the limits of vision in one direction, the telescope in another. Both, however, increase visibility very little in comparison with what remains invisible. Physics and chemistry show us the possibility of interesting phenomena in such small quantities or in such distant worlds as will never be visible to us. But this only strengthens the idea of the existence of an enormous invisible world around a small visible world. Mathematics goes even further. It calculates such relations of magnitude and such relations between these relations as have nothing similar in the visible world surrounding us. We are forced to admit that the invisible world differs from the visible not only in size, but in other properties that we can neither define nor understand, and which only show us that laws inferred by us for the visible world cannot refer to the invisible world. In this way, invisible worlds, the religious, the philosophical and the scientific, are after all more closely related to one another than they would at first appear. These invisible worlds of different categories possess identical properties common to all. Those properties are first, incomprehensibility for us, that is incomprehensibility from the ordinary point of view, or for ordinary means of cognition. Then secondly, the fact that they contain the causes of the phenomena of the visible world. This idea of causes is always associated with the invisible world. In the invisible world of religious systems, invisible forces govern people and visible phenomena. In the scientific world, the causes of visible phenomena always come from the invisible world of small quantities and vibrations. In philosophical systems, phenomena is only our concept of the noumenon, that is an illusion, the real cause of which remains hidden and inaccessible to us. This shows that on all levels of his development, man has always understood that the causes of visible and observable phenomena lie beyond the sphere of his observation. He has found that among observable phenomena certain facts could be regarded as causes of other facts, but these deductions were insufficient for the explanation of everything that occurred in himself and around him. Therefore, in order to be able to explain the causes, it was necessary for him to have an invisible world consisting of spirits or ideas or vibrations. The other problem that attracted the attention of men by its insolubility, and which by the form of its approximate solution determined the direction and development of human thought, was the problem of death. That is the explanation of death, the idea of future life of the immortal soul or the absence of the immortal soul and so on. Man could never reconcile himself to the idea of death as disappearance. Too many things contradicted it. There were in himself too many traces of the dead, their faces, words, gestures, opinions, promises, threats, the feelings that they aroused, fear, jealousy and desire. All these continued to live in him, and the fact of their death was more and more forgotten. A man saw his dead friend or enemy in his dreams. He appeared exactly as he was before. Evidently he was living somewhere and could come from somewhere by night. So it was difficult to believe in death, and man always needed theories for the explanation of the existence after death. On the other hand, echoes of esoteric teachings on life and death sometimes reached man. He could hear that the visible, earthly, observable life of man is only a small part of the life belonging to him. Man of course understood in his own way these fragments that reached him, changed them in his own fashion, adapted them to his own level of understanding and built out of them some theory of future existence, similar to existence on earth. The greater part of religious teachings on the future life connect it with the idea of reward or punishment, sometimes in an undisguised, sometimes in a veiled form. Heaven and hell, transmigration of souls, reincarnation, and the wheel of lives, all these theories contain the idea of reward or punishment. But religious theories often do not satisfy man, and in addition to the recognized orthodox ideas of life after death, there usually exist other, as it were, illegitimate ideas of the world beyond the grave or of the spirit world which allow a greater freedom of imagination. No religious teaching, no religious system can by itself satisfy people. There is always some other more ancient system of popular belief underlying it, or hiding behind it. Behind external Christianity, behind Buddhism, there stand the remains of ancient pagan creeds. In Christianity, the remains of pagan beliefs and customs. In Buddhism, the cult of the devil, which sometimes make a deep mark on external religion. In modern Protestant countries, for example, where the remains of paganism are already completely extinct, there have come into existence, under the outward mask of logical and moral Christianity, systems of primitive thinking of the world beyond the grave, such as spiritualism and kindred teachings. Theories of existence beyond the grave are always connected with theories of the invisible world, the former are always based upon the latter. This all relates to religion and pseudo-religion. There are no philosophical theories of existence beyond the grave. All theories of life after death can be called religious, or more correctly, pseudo-religious. It is difficult to take philosophy as a whole, so diverse and so contradictory are the various speculative systems. Still, to a certain extent it is possible to accept as a standard of philosophical thinking, the view which can see the unreality of the phenomenal world, and the unreality of man's existence in the world of things and events. The unreality of the separate existence of man and the incompatibility for us of the forms of real existence, although this view can be based upon very different foundations, either materialistic or idealistic. In both cases the question of life and death acquires a new character and cannot be reduced to the naive categories of ordinary thinking. For such a view there is no particular difference between life and death because strictly speaking there are no proofs of separate existence, of separate lives. There are not and there cannot be any scientific theories for existence after death because there are no facts in favor of the reality of such an existence while science, successfully or unsuccessfully, wishes to deal with facts. In the fact of death, the most important point for science is a certain change in the state of the organism, which stops all vital functions and the decomposition of the body following upon it. Science sees in man no psychic life independent of the vital functions, and all theories of life after death from the scientific point of view are pure fiction. Modern attempts at scientific investigation of spiritual phenomena and the paranormal lead nowhere and can lead nowhere, for there is a mistake here in the very setting of the problem. In spite of the difference between the various theories of a future life, they all have one common feature. They either picture life beyond the grave as similar to earthly life or deny it altogether. They do not and cannot attempt to conceive life after death in new forms or categories. This is precisely what makes all usual theories of life after death unsatisfactory. Philosophical and strictly scientific thought shows us the necessity of reconsidering the problem from completely new points of view. A few hints coming from the esoteric teaching partly known to us indicate the same. It already becomes evident that if the problem of death and life after death can be approached in any way, it must be approached from quite a new angle. In the same way, the question of the invisible world must be approached from a new angle. All we know, all we have thought till now, shows us the reality and the vital importance of these problems. Until he has answered in one way or the other the questions of the invisible world and of life after death, man cannot think of anything else without creating a whole series of contradictions. Furthermore, he must base his treatment of the problem of death either upon science, or religion, or philosophy. But to a thinking man both the scientific denial of the possibility of life after death and the pseudo-religious admission of it, for we know nothing but pseudo-religion, the different spiritual, theosophical and similar theories quite justly appear equally naive. Nor can the abstract philosophical view satisfy man, for such a view is too remote from life, too remote from direct real sensations. One cannot live by it. In relation to the phenomena of life and their possible causes unknown to us, philosophy is very like astronomy in its relation to the distant stars. Astronomy calculates the movement of stars, which are at colossal distances from us, but all celestial bodies are alike for it, they are nothing but moving dots. Thus philosophy is too remote from concrete problems such as the problem of future life. Science does not know the world beyond the grave. Pseudo-religion creates the other world in the image of the earthly world. This helplessness of man in the face of the problems of the invisible world and of death becomes particularly obvious when we begin to realize that the world is far bigger and far more complex than we have hitherto thought. That what we think we know occupies only a very insignificant place amidst that which we do not know. Our basic concept of the world must be broadened. Already we feel and know that we can no longer trust the eyes with which we see, or the hands with which we touch. The real world eludes us at such attempts to ascertain its existence. A more subtle method, a more efficient means are needed. The ideas of the fourth dimension, ideas of many-dimensional space show the way by which we may arrive at the broadening of our concept of the world. The expression fourth dimension is often met with in conversational language and in literature, but it is seldom that anybody has a clear idea of what it really means. Generally, the fourth dimension is used as the synonym for the mysterious, miraculous, supernatural, incomprehensible and incognizable. As a kind of general definition of the superphysical world. Spiritualists and occultists of various schools often make use of this expression in their literature, assigning to the sphere of the fourth dimension all the phenomena of the world beyond, or the astral sphere. But they do not explain what it means, and from what they say one can understand that the chief property which they ascribe to the fourth dimension is unknowableness. The connecting of the idea of the fourth dimension with existing theories of the invisible world, or the world beyond, is certainly quite fantastic. For as already said, all religious, spiritualist, philosophical and other theories of the invisible world first of all make it exactly similar to the visible and consequently three-dimensional world. Mathematics therefore quite justly objects to the established view of the fourth dimension as something belonging to the beyond. The very idea of the fourth dimension must have arisen in close connection with mathematics, or to put it better, in close connection with the idea of measuring the world. It must have arisen from the supposition that aside from the three known dimensions of space, length, breadth, and height, there might also exist a fourth dimension, inaccessible to our perception. Logically, the supposition of the existence of the fourth dimension can be based upon the observation of those things and events in the world surrounding us for which the measurement of length, breadth, and height is not sufficient, or which elude all measurement. Because there are things and events, the existence of which calls for no doubt, but which cannot be expressed in any terms of measurement. Such are, for instance, various effects of vital and psychic processes. Such are all ideas, mental images, and memories, such are dreams. If we consider them as existing in a real objective sense, then we can suppose that they have some other dimension besides those accessible for us, that is, some extension immeasurable for us. There exist attempts at purely mathematical definition of the fourth dimension. It is said, for instance, that in many problems of pure and applied mathematics, formulae and mathematical expressions are met with, containing four or more variable quantities, each of which, independently of the others, may be positive or negative and lie between plus infinity and minus infinity. As every mathematical formula, every equation can have a dimensional expression, so from this is deduced an idea of space which has four or more dimensions. See the article Four-dimensional space in the Russian Encyclopedia of Brockhaus and Ephraim. The weak point of this definition, however, is the proposition accepted as unquestionable that every mathematical formula, every equation can have a dimensional expression. In reality, such a proposition is entirely without ground, and this deprives the definition of all meaning. In reasoning by analogy with the existing dimensions, it must be supposed that if the fourth dimension existed, it would mean that side by side with us, there lies some other space that we do not know, do not see, and into which we are unable to pass. It would then be possible to draw a line from any point of our space into this domain of the fourth dimension, in a direction unknown to us and impossible either to define or comprehend. If we could visualize the direction of this line going out of our space, then we should see the domain of the fourth dimension. Geometrically, this proposition has the following meaning. We can conceive simultaneously three lines perpendicular, and not parallel to one another. These three lines are used by us to measure the whole of our space, which is therefore called three-dimensional. If the domain of the fourth dimension, lying outside of our space, exists, then this means that aside from the three perpendiculars known to us, determining the length, the breadth, and the height of solids, there must also exist a fourth perpendicular, determining some new extension unknowable to us. Then the space measurable by these four perpendiculars could be called four-dimensional. We are unable to define geometrically, or to conceive this fourth perpendicular, and the fourth dimension still remains extremely enigmatic. The opinion is sometimes met with, that mathematicians know something about the fourth dimension, that is inaccessible to ordinary mortals. Sometimes it is said, and you can find such assertions in literature, that Lobachevsky discovered the fourth dimension. More recently, the discovery of the fourth dimension was ascribed to Einstein or Minkowski. In reality, mathematics can say very little about the fourth dimension. There is nothing in the hypothesis of the fourth dimension that would make it inadmissible from a mathematical point of view. This hypothesis does not contradict any of the accepted axioms, and because of this does not meet with particular opposition on the part of mathematics. Mathematics even admits the possibility of establishing the relationship that should exist between four-dimensional and three-dimensional space, i.e. certain properties of the fourth dimension. But they do all this in a very general and rather indefinite form. No exact definition of the fourth dimension exists in mathematics. Lobachevsky treated the geometry of Euclid, i.e. geometry of three-dimensional space, as a particular case of geometry which ought to be applicable to a space of any number of dimensions. But this is not mathematics in the strictest sense of the word. It is only metaphysics on mathematical themes, and the deductions from it cannot be formulated mathematically or can be formulated only in specially constructed expressions, which have no general meaning. Other mathematicians regarded axioms accepted in the geometry of Euclid as artificial and incorrect, attempting to disprove them on the strength chiefly of certain deductions from Lobachevsky's spherical geometry. To prove, for example, that parallel lines meet. They contended that the accepted axioms are correct only for three-dimensional space, and on the basis of their arguments, which disproved these axioms, they built up a new geometry of many dimensions. But all this is not the geometry of 4 dimensions. The 4th dimension could only be considered as geometrically proven when the direction of the unknown line starting from any point in our space and going into the region of the 4th dimension could be determined, i.e. when a means of constructing a 4th perpendicular was found. It is difficult to describe even approximately the significance that the discovery of the 4th perpendicular in our universe would have for our knowledge. The conquest of the air, hearing, and seeing at a distance, establishing connections with other planets or with other solar systems, all this is nothing in comparison with the discovery of a new dimension. But so far it has not been made. We must recognize that we are helpless before the riddle of the 4th dimension and must try to examine the problem within the limits available to us. After a closer and more exact investigation of the problem itself, we come to the conclusion that it cannot be solved within existing conditions. The problem of the 4th dimension, though purely geometrical at first glance, cannot be solved by geometrical means. Our geometry of 3 dimensions is as insufficient for investigation of the question of the 4th dimension, as planimetry alone is insufficient for the investigation of stereometry. We must find the 4th dimension if it exists in a purely experimental way, and also find a means for projective representation of it, in 3-dimensional space. Only then shall we be able to create the geometry of 4 dimensions. Even slight acquaintance with the problem of the 4th dimension shows the necessity for studying it from the psychological and physical aspects. The 4th dimension is unknowable. If it exists and if at the same time we cannot know it, then that evidently means that something is lacking in our psychic apparatus, in our faculties of perception. In other words, phenomena of the region of the 4th dimension are not reflected in our organs of sense. We must examine why this should be so. What are our defects upon which this non-receptivity depends, and must find the conditions, even if only theoretically, that would make the 4th dimension comprehensible and accessible to us. These are all questions relating to psychology or possibly to the theory of knowledge. Furthermore, we know that the region of the 4th dimension, again if it exists, is not only unknowable to us for our psychic apparatus, but it is inaccessible in a purely physical sense. This must depend not upon our defects, but on the particular properties and conditions of the region of the 4th dimension itself. It is necessary to examine what these conditions are, which makes the region of the 4th dimension inaccessible to us, and to find the relation between the physical condition of the region of the 4th dimension and the physical condition of our world. Having established this, it is necessary to see whether in the world surrounding us there is anything similar to these conditions, that is, whether there are any relations analogous to relations between the region of 3 dimensions and that of 4 dimensions. Speaking in general, therefore, before attempting to build up a geometry of 4 dimensions, it is necessary to create a physics of 4 dimensions, that is to define physical laws and conditions that may exist in the space of 4 dimensions.